Hi again, this is Kelly with Bray, and we are once more at Karsten's Ace Hardware on Dynamite in Cave Creek. And we're looking through here at their supplement area. So today we're going to talk about supplements and some different things that you might want to add into your donkey's ration, and some different things that you probably don't need that are probably not a bad idea to just go ahead and pass up. We talked last week when we talked about the concentrates that a lot of the um, bagged feeds, a lot of the concentrate feeds are going toward having less grain and more forage and more things like flax, because a lot of times when your animal is eating only hay, they are missing some omegas, which are pretty essential. So one of the things I do like to feed is a little bit of flax. And so you can see on here it's got omegas, it helps our immune system, and it supports a healthy skin and coat. Again, if your animal has hair that's kind of dull, kind of brittle, they just don't have any shine in their coat's kind of rough, you might consider adding some flax. We did mention in one of our other videos that there are also treats that are exclusively extruded flax, and so that might be a good option for you to just add in some flax treats. But I do like to add a little bit of flax to their diet. It's really good for their gut, and it's really good for their coat. So if you'd like your donkey to get a little shine on them, you can add a little bit of flax. However, it does come in oil as well. Wheat germ oil you also don't need, but this flaxseed oil, there's a few of these, and then rice bran oil is the same in that both of these things, again, they're oils, they're just going to be straight fat, and that's not really what you're looking for with your donkey. Your donkey probably does not need a fat supplement. Most do not. Um, that's the oils are going to do nothing for their microbiome. In fact, sometimes oils are a little bit problematic because they kind of suffocate the microbes in their gut. Um, so I wouldn't opt for the oil. I would opt for a flax supplement if that's what you're looking to do. Um, this is ground, and they are going to be able to digest that a little bit easier than whole flax. This is not the only brand that's available. This does maybe look like the only brand they have here, but this is just ground. I will tell you that this flax will have a little bit more of it because it's not human grade. It will have a little bit more of the rest of the plant in it. So it's not going to look like what you get from the bulk bin at Sprouts or Trader Joe's. Um, you'll have some little sticks and things like that, and that's just the rest of the plant, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just going to look a little bit different. But again, the ground flax is going to be a little bit easier to digest than the whole flax seeds. But that is a really good option for a supplement just to add in a little bit of those omegas and help your animal skin and coat. So then you've got this laser sheen skin and coat supplement. And again, it talks about it does a lot of the same things as the flax. But if you go over here, if we look at the Simply Flax, it is Simply Flax. And please excuse the fact that my fingers are very dirty. I've been outside flipping feed bags around. But again, there's no binders, there's nothing else in there. It's only flax. It's not going to have a lot of starches, it's not going to have a lot of sugars because it's just the flax seed. And then when we come over here and we look at the laser sheen supplement, which again is supposed to basically do the same thing, but what you've got here is soybean meal and rice bran primarily. It does have flaxseed, and then it's got some things like biotin and things like that. But in my opinion, when I'm developing my ration, these are just not necessarily things that I want to add in. I don't necessarily want to add in a lot of soy. I don't necessarily want to add in the rice bran because, again, and I don't necessarily want to add in all of these other kind of add-ons because the flax works really well on its own. So I typically just stay away from this a little bit because you've got a lot of things that, in my experience, aren't really doing much better than this that's just flax. We've jumped over to my house now because we're going to cover a couple of things that they didn't have at the Ace Hardware, just like we bopped around for some of that cob mix. But these are a few different supplements that I personally use the Simply Flax, we did talk about that, but you'll see why here in a minute. This is a little bit different. We're going to we'll start with the Simply Flax bucket here. So what this is, and I mentioned when we were talking about this in the store, that I do use this Simply Flax. And what you'll see here is a lot of the flax. And you can see we mentioned that this flax will not be quite human grade. It'll have like these little sticks and things. Not a problem at all for your animal. You're generally feeding them sticks and things. But why this flax looks different than what you will get is because we have in here this, which is hemp seed. So with my animals, what I do is generally a 1-to-1-to-1 mixture of flax, hemp, and chia. We'll talk about the chia here in a minute. But what I typically do is just mix the hemp and the chia, or I'm sorry, the hemp and the flax together in this bucket to store. So that's why we have a Simply Flax bucket, and in it is flax and hemp seed. Again, that's how the hemp seed looks. What I do is just buy that in bulk from Amazon. We don't need to really overthink that. You can buy it from the grocery store in smaller containers, but you can buy like a 5-pound bag, something like that, from Amazon. So I do that. If organic's important to you, you can buy organic. If it's not, you can buy conventional. And then again, I just mix that up, and this is how I store it because it comes in a plastic bag from Amazon, and my cats, when I say my animals, I mean my cats, they will chew through it. But the reason I do this, the reason I do the hemp and the chia and the flax is to boost up those omegas. We talked about that a little bit when we talked in the concentrates video about Omega Match, and we talked about it a little bit with the flax. But the hemp is a really good source of omegas, and it does have potentially some anti-inflammatory properties as well. So yeah, that's why I like the hemp seeds. And again, we'll talk a little bit about the chia, but I just stick that in with the flax because this hemp is a very, very oily seed. We can squish that up a little bit and see if, yeah, you can kind of see there, it makes a little bit of a sheen on your hands. It's a super, super oily seed. And for that reason, it will go rancid if you leave it someplace it's really hot for a really long time. So that's why this is in my kitchen. What I typically do is take a week or so worth of my seed mix to my tack room, and that keeps it from getting too hot and going rancid. It'll kind of discolor and clump together. It's not necessarily dangerous when that happens, but the taste gets a little off. It gets a little less palatable. So that's what I do to solve that, is I just keep that in my house largely, and then I will take it to my tack room for the week I'm going to, when I'm going to feed it for that week. You can see also this is not well mixed, and normally I would mix it a little bit better, but I wanted to be able to pull that hemp out and show you guys. So when I'm done with this video, I'll mix it up a little bit better so that it's a little more homogenized. But that, again, is the flax that we already talked about, and then just some bulk hemp seed. I think I got it on Amazon. You can get it kind of anywhere you want. You can get it at the grocery store. You can get human grade. You can get, it doesn't really matter from one to the next. But that does add in some of those omegas. Anecdotally, I have noticed that my little guy that's got locking stifles does do a little bit better if he has his little seed mix. And like I said, hemp does have allegedly some anti-inflammatory properties, just like this goes with as well. So that's the hemp and the flax that we already talked about that lives in that bucket. And again, some of these supplements, just like with the psyllium, you might buy it based on what bucket you want. That these are, again, just like the psyllium, super handy buckets. So if you need some buckets, buy that brand that gives you a good bucket. Then we'll go here to these chia seeds. These are, again, they're listed as organic. They're listed as non-GMO, which if it's organic, it is non-GMO. That's part of organic. It's also listed as gluten-free, which it would be. It's not wheat, which is generally the gluten that you're worried about. But all of that is just to say, because this is a human-grade product, obviously we're not really worried about gluten when we're talking about animal feed. There's a lot of wheat in your animal feed. But anyway, that's just human grade chia seed, and it says right there why I want it, which is the omegas in there. It will help your animals' skin, help their coat, help them just look a little bit better. Chia is theoretically high in protein. However, you're not feeding very much again, so for those little tiny seeds, there is a lot of protein in there, but that's not necessarily saying overall putting a tablespoon of chia is going to raise your protein all that high in your feed overall. So again, I mix those up, flax, chia, hemp, and that's what I'm doing with those. I'm using them to get omegas. And then also the chia especially is, it's a really good prebiotic. It's pretty good for their gut. So that is something I'm using it for as well. If you ever consume chia, you know that when it gets wet, it gets that weird little jelly on it, much like psyllium does. So it's kind of serving a similar purpose as the psyllium. It helps kind of soothe the gut. Some people say that it helps with fecal water syndrome. I've not super noticed that, but I also don't have severe fecal water syndrome to deal with. But it does help feed that gut, keep that gut happy, just like the flax and psyllium. And it also adds those omega-3s. This is another product that a lot of folks really like. It's very popular to feed to donkeys, and it is California Trace Minerals. So they have it in a couple of versions. They have a powder and they also have a pellet. And largely what the point of this is just to, again, round out and fill up any holes in your animal's diet as far as vitamins and minerals are concerned. This has kind of minimal additional ingredients beyond just the powdered vitamins and minerals. It does have a little bit of rice bran and almond wholemeal. And then it's got basically, again, all of these just vitamin and mineral powders in there. So what this is basically, a top dressing if you don't want to feed concentrate feed, especially if you've got an animal that is maybe allergic to some ingredients that are in a lot of the concentrate feeds. So if you've got an animal that's allergic to alfalfa or soy or something like that, this might be a good choice for you. You would add it into a pelleted forage like some of the bagged forages that we talked about the other day, so like teff or Timothy or something like that. You can just add this in on top, wet everything down a little bit, and there you go. You've made yourself more of a complete feed. This is not, I kind of argued with myself whether this should be in supplements or concentrates, because it kind of counts almost as both. This doesn't have the high energy that some of the concentrates have. It is more just like if you were to take a multivitamin tablet for you. So if your Safe Choice Special Care is a multivitamin gummy, this is a multivitamin tablet. But it's a good option for folks who've got animals that have some allergies, or you're just really, really trying to really get those sugars under control. So this is not very different. If you were to put this with a Timothy or a Bermuda or a teff pellet, what you're going to end up basically with are the lichen pellets or the Emetsa pellets that we talked about in our forage video. So we're going to talk in our next video about how to make a ration, that there's a million different combinations of how to do this. And so, you can choose to just buy the fortified pellets, the Emetsa, the Stanley, the Lake and Light, any of those, and have those and not have to feed any top dressing. Or you can buy the unfortified pellets that are just the grass hay only, and you can sprinkle this on top, and then you can use the ones that don't have, use your other pellets for training treat, and you don't have to worry about them being fortified with anything. So it all just kind of comes down to your management, but this is an option if you want to stay away from some of those concentrate feeds but you are looking to round out their diet and make sure they've got all the vitamins and minerals they need, this is an option as well. So I have not ever seen these in my local feed store. You can buy them online. That's why we're looking at it here on just a printed piece of paper, like we were with some of the other products that I don't have the bag for. But yeah, so that's California Trace. You'll see that a lot when people ask about how to feed donkeys. There you go. That's what it looks like, and that's what it is. Like I said, it's basically the donkey equivalent of a one a day vitamin tablet. Not a one a day vitamin gummy. That would be something more akin to your Safe Choice Special Care. So anyway, that's that, and so that's just another option for you as far as supplements. Another thing that is important when you're talking about, again, microbiome and gut health is probiotics. A lot of people would like to add probiotics into their donkey's diet. Probiotics and, you know, those gut bacteria are really important for their digestion, for their whole body health. So there's a lot of probiotic supplements. And they actually, the one I use is DAC Digestive Feed Additive, and they don't carry it at this store, but I will show you a little bit later what that looks like. I'm very happy with that. This is a new product that Purina just put out. There's a ton of research behind it. You can actually go online and check out all the research. One of the things that is different with this and with DAC is that they both mention that their probiotics can withstand the heat of production and shipping. That does not mean leave it in your tack room when it's 110 degrees outside. Keep your probiotics inside, but in a temperature controlled area. But this Purina MQ and the DAC both do state that their microbes do prevail and live through their processing, um, their their processing basically. And so you've got some other brands that, if you go and you look at the research, some of these other brands, their microbes don't necessarily prevail through the processing, the shipping, the handling, and all of that. So they might not have as many CFUs, colony forming units, so live bacteria, as some of these other products. So these are not my favorite. I haven't seen a visible difference. I have used Probios and I have used it for a significant amount of time, and I've not seen the difference in my animals that I can visually see with that DAC digestive feed additive. I've not tried this yet. I am planning to. They actually will send you a little test swab, so you can do a swab of your animal and send it in, and they'll tell you what their gut flora looks like. So I am waiting for winter when I can ship that and it might survive. Um, but I will tell you, I have used these and I've not seen the difference that I have seen in using the DAC digestive feed additive, which is less bloating in my animal, and they're a little bit better. They're a little bit more resilient on changing forage and things like that. Psyllium is another thing that we talked about in our video about bringing home your donkey. And it is something that every donkey owner should have and should be feeding. We also mentioned it a little bit when we talked about the bagged forages, that it's good to have some bagged forage that you feed to your animal, because you will need to feed them psyllium once a month, especially here in the desert Southwest. They will inevitably ingest sand, and this will just help keep that gut happy and comfortable. It's got prebiotics. It'll feed those gut microbes, and it will help kind of clear out some of that sand so that you don't have sand colic and impactions from that. Um, there's kind of two things to look at with psyllium. If you go down here to this sand purge, you can see that this is candy apple flavored, and it's got cane molasses and apple flavorings. Don't get this. You don't want that. You don't want to be adding in a bunch of cane molasses to your psyllium. There's no reason to do that. What you're going to want to do is go over here and look at some of these other brands that are just psyllium and not molasses. So this is just the Sand Clear. It doesn't have a candy apple on the front. But again, once you start looking at the back, start looking at which ones don't have a lot of added molasses or anything like that. Once you arrive at 3 or 4 that don't have those additions, you can basically just decide via price. You can decide um, based on size. If you've got a lot of animals or you like to buy a larger portion at once, go for that. If you like to buy this small little guy because you've just got 2 minis, have at it. Not gonna lie, I buy a little bit based on who has the bucket that I need at that point. These are great. These are really good buckets. So if you need a bucket, you might decide, you know what, this week I'm gonna do Sand Clear and I'm gonna get a free bucket with it. So that's really how I choose psyllium. If you want to get the cheapest, as long as it's not got a bunch of molasses, get the cheapest. If you want to get the one that is giant so you don't often have to come back to the store, get the one that's giant so you don't often have to come back to the store. It's it's not rocket science, and it's not super important or super different which one you get. Another supplement that you might like to keep in your feed room is electrolytes. Now, there is a difference between electrolytes and salt, and you'll hear a lot of people that say just add plain white table salt to your ration. That will encourage them to drink. And that is true if your goal is to encourage your animal to drink. However, that is serving a different purpose than electrolytes. Electrolytes are going to have things like potassium and salt and your sodium chloride, just your table salt, that are necessary for muscle function, that are lost in sweating, also lost if your animal's got severe diarrhea. So if you're working your animal hard and they're sweating, or if they have a bout of diarrhea or something like that, you may want to opt for electrolytes rather than just salt. There's a few ways that electrolytes can be given. They have paste and they have powders. They also have down here some cookies. So there, again, a few different ways you can do this. I typically like to have a tube of paste around because if I have an instance where if I'm going to travel or if my animals just, again, have had severe diarrhea. Right now it is July in Arizona, and when the temperature gets to 117, I've learned is the threshold, my animals get diarrhea. Obviously, that is a good recipe for dehydration. It's very hot. They've got diarrhea. I do just give them a little dose of this electrolyte paste in their mouth. That way I know they've got it. I know everyone in the pen who needs it has gotten it. Whereas if I just sprinkle it in their ration, I'm not certain everybody's gotten the amount they need. Again, this is also good for traveling. If you've got animals that maybe aren't drinking, shoot a little bit of that in their mouth, and they should start drinking pretty quickly after that. So if you're choosing electrolytes, again, you're going to want to look at the back and make sure there's no added sugars or anything like that for palatability. Right there, this brand says that it's sugar-free, no artificial dyes. Another thing that I do like to avoid are the artificial dyes. So if you come over here and look at things like this, those colors are for people. Those colors are not for your animal. Your animal doesn't see that in their water. They don't see that in their feed. That's for you, the human consumer. And to be honest, these dyes are very aggressive. I've purchased these electrolytes before because that's all that was in the store. Those dyes don't break down in the Arizona sun. I don't know what they are. They stay that vibrant. They're very stable. I don't love that being consumed. So I personally do stay away from these heavily dyed electrolytes and tend more toward the more natural colors. Again, that's my personal preference. If you are not bothered at all by dyes, if you like the rainbow look in your feed room, well, it's your animal, you can do what you want. That's just my personal preference. This is another thing that we're going to cover real quick. These are salt blocks. These white ones are just salt. That's all they are. All these others have extra things added in. That one's selenium. That one over there is sulfur. That's a mineral block. When you're doing these, for one, if your hay is not deficient in selenium, don't feed them selenium. If you are not deficient in sulfur, don't feed them sulfur. If you are getting their minerals from somewhere else, don't feed them a mineral block. White salt, good to go. That's the easiest thing. You can have, I personally like to both feed loose salt in their feed and also have a block for them to do as an activity. Um, but also be very careful. Some of these blocks are made to be highly palatable for cattle. Don't get those. Don't get all stock blocks. These work too if you're doing salt. These Redmond rocks or those little guys. If you just want to see what your animal likes the best. So have salt available. You're gonna hear us talk about that a few more times. But that salt, don't get these rainbow of stock blocks. That's not for you. That is for areas that are deficient. And if your vet has decided you're deficient, there are more accurate ways to get them supplemented than an if you want it block. When you're looking at mineral blocks, you might come across some things like this, where they've got these, again, these are fly control pressed blocks, and it says for cattle and horses. These right here, these are medicated and they are for ruminants. These are not for your animals. Be sure you're checking to see what species these are for, because some of them are species specific, and this can be very dangerous for your equids. But these here, again, they're going to be highly palatable. They're going to include a lot of molasses. You don't want these. If you're looking for a salt source for your animal, here you go, a salt block. And you can have these mineral blocks. It's not going to hurt your animals. You're probably not going to get enough minerals to actually make a difference in your animal's diet, but it won't hurt them. Again, plain salt block or these Himalayan salt blocks. I prefer these hanging ones simply because they stay cleaner. No other reason than that. If you're not sure what kind of salt block to get, just get one of these little guys. See if your animal likes that. Maybe throw one of these Himalayan salt blocks out there too. See what they like, and then just keep buying more of that. But stay away from compressed blocks and all stock blocks. These are not for you. They are dangerous for your animals. This is another option. Again, some folks, to trigger drinking and hydration, they like to use just plain white table salt. This is another option. It's basically the same as the Redmond Rock hanging salt licks, but this is crushed so that you can more easily put it in a ration. Again, the point of this is that it just triggers hydration. It's going to make your animals want to drink. So that's not going to achieve the same thing as the electrolytes. If your animals are just hanging out day to day and you just want them to consume more water, something like this is a good option. White table salt is a good option. To be honest, what I do when my hanging rocks break and they come off the rope and I have big chunks of them left, I just hit them with a hammer and they become this crushed rock. And then I feed them like that in my um, hay pellet ration daily. So that's an option for you. But that's all this is a crushed rock salt that it looks like the Himalayan salt hanging blocks that you get. These are a couple other options that are helpful if you're traveling or if your animals are particularly stressed due to, say, 4th of July and they're going to have some fireworks, or if you are going into a heat wave or something like that and you just really need them to have a little bit of extra help with gastric support. This rainwater helps with a little bit. It helps encourage drinking. It's got some vitamins, or it's got some minerals in it, so it's going to help a little bit with those electrolytes. The Daily Red Fortified is kind of the same thing. These are not a bad idea. Again, if you're traveling, something like that, you may consider adding these to their ration just to help them get through those times of stress a little bit easier. This blue light is another somewhat new product that they're carrying here. And this tells you, um, right on here, they call it a unique electrolyte and hydration support. But this, if we can get focused here, formulated to provide supplemental energy and oral hydration. So you'll note in the ingredients here that this is a little bit of a kind of a treat, kind of a grain with these electrolytes added in. And it's going to be something similar to this. Both of these I wouldn't use for your daily electrolytes. However, there are some situations where these could be beneficial. Again, if you're traveling all day, your animal's not really eating, it's not really drinking, you're a little bit concerned about that negative energy balance that you might be running up against, some concerns about hyperlipemia or something like that. Maybe they're just not feeling great. um, this could be a good option for them. Or if you have been out and you've been on a run and you've done 10, 12 hard miles going up and down hills and you think they just need a little extra boost, this could be an option for you. This wouldn't be my day-to-day electrolyte choice, but it could be a good option for something like that if they're working or if they're not necessarily feeling their best. This same thing, that this is really a cookie kind of situation, a treat situation, but it might be beneficial just to make sure they've got those calories in them if you're traveling or if they don't have a chance to eat. And you do want to make sure they've got a little bit more energy in them aside from just the um, electrolytes and hydration. And again, there are all kinds of different electrolyte and salt products. And this really, again, you're going to just go with this based on how much you want to spend, um, what looks good to you. There's not a right or wrong answer necessarily on these electrolytes. Just don't get one that has a lot of added sugar. Then we move over here to this vitamin E powder. And the thing about vitamin E is it is a fat soluble vitamin that your animals will get naturally in growing plants, living growing plants. So if your animals are grazing on living growing grass or trees or what have you, they probably have enough vitamin E. However, it's not a particularly stable molecule. So as soon as that grass or hay is harvested to be turned into hay and baled, that vitamin E starts to break down. So by the time the hay gets to you, especially if it's been stored for a while, it's likely it's lacking in vitamin E. Winter grasses that are dormant also don't really have any vitamin E. So if you're only feeding hay, there is a chance you need vitamin E supplementation. Pretty good chance. And like I said, vitamin E is a fat-soluble vitamin. So instead of your other vitamins like B or C, those are water-soluble. So if your animal takes them in, doesn't need to utilize them, they just are excreted in urine. Whereas with vitamin E and the fat-soluble vitamins, the extra is stored in their body fat. Which, again, that is an evolutionary trait because in the winter, they're really not taking in any vitamin E because those dormant grasses don't have much of it. So in the winter, they will utilize that excess vitamin E that's been stored in their body fat. So, again, if you're only feeding hay, there's a chance you need a vitamin E supplement. If you're feeding one of the bagged feeds that we talked about, you may notice that a lot of them have vitamin E in them, so you might not necessarily need this secondary supplementation. I personally am not currently feeding any of those bagged feeds that have the vitamin E. We'll talk about why a little bit later, and we'll talk about why in the building a ration video, but because of that, I go ahead and give them a little bit of this. If you don't want to give vitamin E powder and you don't want to choose the bagged concentrates, you can also just let your animal graze for a little bit, a couple times a week. Take them out for 20 minutes a couple times a week and let them graze on some growing grass or let them have some mesquite branches or what have you, and they'll get their vitamin E. So there's a few ways to do that. This is another one, though, that I don't leave in my tack room because, again, it's a little bit of a volatile molecule and it will kind of have a hard time in the heat. So that's vitamin E. There's a lot of ways to get it. You can graze them, you can use bagged feeds, or if you're not using those bagged grains, you can just get a vitamin E supplement. But vitamin E is essential, so you do need to make sure they are getting that one way or another. And then, last but not least, we have these, and I forgot to talk about this with the supplements in the feed store, but one of the things we always really like in a supplement is this little third-party quality seal here. And what that means is what they're saying about the product in this bag has been verified by this third-party auditing company. They've looked into it, and the claims being made are true and accurate. So we do really like to see that in supplements because supplements are not really regulated by any entity. This is just a completely opt-in thing, but it is nice to see. So you don't see that on all supplements. Again, these, that's a human one. So we do have these other things here. They're not really saying the same. Well, they're saying some of the same things. This one doesn't have it. I wish it did. That one doesn't have it either. But this one does. So points for them. They've also got a couple of other third-party things on here. But all that is to say, these are herb mixes that I use. And the reason for using these is kind of, I build my ration with some of these things instead of a grain. So what I like about these is, again, like it says there, it's herbs. It's an array of herbs that you would find in a pasture. And on both of those, this one that's for endocrine support, it's Vitex, which some people call chasteberry. Vitex, chasteberry, whatever you want to call it, grows amazing in Arizona. It's a beautiful plant. If you want to grow that yourself, you can and feed that. So that's just an FYI for you. But the reason I like these is much like with human food, and they tell you eat a rainbow, because while broccoli is super good for you, broccoli doesn't have necessarily all the same nutrients in it that an apple does. And an apple doesn't have all the same nutrients that a blueberry does. So they say eat a lot of different foods, eat a varied diet, and that will plug up most of the holes in your diet. So that's kind of what I like to do by feeding these herb mixes rather than a grain. The grain does have all of that added in, but you might have some issues with some of the other carriers in there, which would be your grains, your soy, your alfalfa, whatever. And so this, and then again, you've got some of those elements that are added in, those binders added in for palatability that you might want to be avoiding. So these, we'll open this up. These are, we look in here, just herbs. So we'll grab some of these guys out and put them on here for you. So you can see those are just herbs. We've got some little flowers and some little sticks and whatnot. And basically what that is we've just got an array of species, which means you've got an array of different vitamin and mineral profiles within those species to help round out your animal's diet rather than just your teff hay and straw, which is going to have the vitamins and minerals of teff hay and straw, but they're also missing quite a lot. And then this is, again, same thing, just an herb mix. It does look a little bit different because it's got a little bit different herbs in it. So that's these. I do like this brand. It is out of Britain. I'm really happy with products out of the UK and out of the EU. They generally have pretty strict food safety and labeling practices, which I like. So these are an option as well if you want to round out some holes in your animal's diet, but you're maybe not looking to add in some of those fillers and things that you don't want, things to increase palatability that are in your grains and bagged feeds. So that's an option. Again, we'll talk about how to use these a little bit more when we do the next video on how to build a ration, but that's what's going on here. And again, we can just look at some of these other things in here. And once more, a variation in plant species does equal a variation in your gut microbiome, which is a very good thing. We do like a very diverse microbiome. So anyway, that's that one. That's that one. And yeah, so these are some of the other supplements that I use at my house, and we'll go back to talking about what they've got ready for you in the store. One more supplement that you might see, or class of supplements really, is these various ulcer treatments and preventatives. So this is omeprazole, and it's the same as you would take an OTC medicine for you. I think Zantac is omeprazole, if I'm remembering correctly. As you can see, it is not an inexpensive treatment, especially if you have to do the 1 month treatment, which is, I think it comes out to be several $100s for the month. So you've got that omeprazole. You've got a couple of these other products. You've got Nalox, you've got gut, you've got just a few, this Ulcerade. A lot of these things, again, your best treatment for an ulcer is to not get ulcers. And your best way to not get ulcers is to have feed in front of your animals as often as possible, and try your best not to ever go more than 4 hours without feed in front of them. And by that, I mean typically straw is going to be what you use to stretch out between those meals. Most animals don't do well with their grass hay in front of them 24/7. They will typically overeat. Even if it's in a hay net or something like that, they still often will overeat if they have access to their grass 24/7, especially if they don't have a lot of other enrichment. Just like us, when we're sitting in our office and we're kind of bored, we don't have any work to do, what do? We get up and we go to the break room and we get a snack, right? Your animals will do that same thing. So if you don't have a lot of enrichment, a lot of room for your animals to walk around, typically you're not going to want to give them that 24/7 access to their grass hay. But that is where straw comes in and just stretches between those little times between feeding, where you've still got something in their gut, but it's not going to be high calorie, it's not going to be high protein. So that's the best way to prevent ulcers, is just always having something in their gut. Don't go more than 4 hours without something for them to nibble on. But if you have to treat for ulcers, that's something that you should really talk to your vet about, because they can be a very painful condition. They can be hard to get rid of. If you see your animal acting like it's got colic symptoms, another one that's really telltale for ulcers is they'll lay on their back. It's very peculiar to look at. You sometimes see videos of it online, and people are like, ha ha ha, isn't that funny? It's not funny. Those animals have ulcers. Um, but they're very, very common. And so if you suspect ulcers, talk to your vet. These are some things that they might tell you to try. But again, the best way to treat ulcers is to prevent ulcers. I can assure you, straw is much, much cheaper than omeprazole. I mentioned a couple of times when going over probiotics that the Purina option, the new Purina option, is a good one. And I also mentioned a couple of times DAC, Digestive Feed Additive. They did not have that at the store, and the version I have is from SmartPak, and it's in the little Smart Packs. Unfortunately, I don't typically like to buy things in the little Smart Packs just because of the added plastic waste. For my management, it's not necessary. I can see how if you've got a large barn with a lot of animals, or they're being boarded or something like that, it would be very useful. For my management, it's not, but that's what I can get right now. Anyway, I've gone ahead and just printed off on a piece of paper here. This is what that label looks like. And so you can see it's that DAC brand and digestive feed additive. It's in this red bag. It comes in a couple of different sizes. It's one that's 2 and a bit pounds, and then they've got one that's big that's like 5 or 10 pounds. I just get the smaller one because, again, anything with probiotics or live organisms, I don't really want to buy a lot of them at one time, just to make sure, they're as fresh as they can be when I get them, and we have the best chance of having those living organisms. Like I said, I don't like to leave this in the tack room in the heat. I will also bring that in small amounts over and keep it in my tack room fridge. Another thing that we didn't talk about when we were going through my supplements at home is this Star West Botanicals slippery elm bark powder. This is another thing that I feed to just help a little bit with gastric comfort and to prevent ulcers. I do have two that are very nervous animals, which is kind of typically one of the things that will make them a little more ulcer prone. So, anyway, that is something I use. And again, I buy this on Amazon. You don't use very much of it each day. Um, so, that's just something I add into my herb mix to help kind of coat that gut and keep that soothed so that you don't have issues with ulcers. So, rather than the ulcer guard or something like that, or some of those different U-guard things that we talked about, this is my choice. But again, there's a lot of options for that. When we go through and we look at all of these different supplements that tend to start inching their way a little bit more toward, and I don't necessarily want to say medications because they're not quite medications, but they are a little bit more specialized supplements. All of these tend to be things that you're really going to want to ask your vet about. I wouldn't just start your animal on an MSM supplement or a muscle supplement or anything like that without talking to your vet first, a joint supplement. Of course, if your vet recommends them, by all means, Red Cell, that's an iron supplement. Any of those things, listen to your vet. But if you just want to add extra little sprinkles to your animal's feed, these are not really the place to go. They are for very specific deficiencies, treating very specific problems, and talk to your vet if you think you should be adding in any of these. Biotin is another supplement that a lot of people like to go to, and you kind of can't see that because they package it funny, this Farrier's formula, Horseshoe or Secret. There's a ton of different biotin and hoof supplements. This is a really popular thing when people are just like, oh, my animal doesn't have great hooves. I'm going to throw in some biotin. If your animal's ration is good and if their footing is good, they likely do not need an additional hoof supplement. If you're running into a situation where you're having a lot of problems with their feet, if their feet are crumbly, if their feet are cracking, if they've got really bad thrush problems and you just can't get it under control, that's time to talk to your vet. You truly shouldn't be having severe issues with your animal's hooves if you're doing basic care. If you have someplace dry and firm for them to stand, if your diet's good and has got low sugar, low protein, you're not foundering them, if you're picking out their feet and staying on top of any thrush issues, if they have ample place to move, you really shouldn't be needing a bunch of hoof supplements. And that if you're struggling with their hooves, you need to talk to your farrier, you need to talk to your vet, you need to see what the specific holes are in their diet that can be plugged up before you reach for one of these hoof supplements. One more supplement that you might see, or class of supplements really, is these various ulcer treatments and preventatives. So this is omeprazole, and it's the same as you would take an OTC medicine for you. I think Zantac is omeprazole, if I'm remembering correctly. As you can see, it is not an inexpensive treatment, especially if you have to do the 1 month treatment, which is, I think it comes out to be several $100s for the month. So you've got that omeprazole. You've got a couple of these other products. You've got Nalox, you've got Gut, you've got just a few, this Ulcerade. A lot of these things, again, your best treatment for an ulcer is to not get ulcers. And your best way to not get ulcers is to have feed in front of your animals as often as possible and try your best not to ever go more than 4 hours without feed in front of them. And by that, I mean typically straw is going to be what you use to stretch out between those meals. Most animals don't do well with their grass hay in front of them 24/7. They will typically overeat even if it's in a hay net or something like that, they still often will overeat if they have access to their grass 24/7, especially if they don't have a lot of other enrichment. Just like us, when we're sitting in our office and we're kind of bored, we don't have any work to do, what do? We get up and we go to the break room and we get a snack, right? Your animals will do that same thing. So if you don't have a lot of enrichment, a lot of room for your animals to walk around, typically you're not going to want to give them that 24/7 access to their grass hay. But that is where straw comes in and just stretches between those little times between feeding where you've still got something in their gut, but it's not going to be high calorie, it's not going to be high protein. So that's the best way to prevent ulcers, is just always having something in their gut. Don't go more than 4 hours without something for them to nibble on. But if you have to treat for ulcers, that's something that you should really talk to your vet about, because they can be a very painful condition. They can be hard to get rid of. If you see something, if you see your animal acting like it's got colic symptoms, another one that's really telltale for ulcers is a lay on their back. It's very peculiar to look at. You sometimes see videos of it online, and people are like, "Ha ha ha! Isn't that funny?" It's not funny. Those animals have ulcers, um, but they're very, very common. And so, if you suspect ulcers, talk to your vet. These are some things that they might tell you to try. But again, the best way to treat ulcers is to prevent ulcers. I can assure you, straw is much, much cheaper than omeprazole. So that's just our quick explainer on supplements. Again, the supplements that you're really going to want to have, regardless of your animal, is some psyllium and a salt supplement. Not necessarily electrolytes, that's depending on what kind of work you're doing, but you are typically going to want to have a psyllium and a salt, and that's just going to help with their gut health, make sure they're hydrated, make sure nobody's got any sand impactions. And beyond that, well, there's a whole aisle of things you can look at and decide with your vet if you need to add anything else in. And after this, we will go ahead and put together our video of how to create a ration. So make sure you tune in when we release that.